Now on the economy. The outlook for the American economy continues to get brighter and brighter under the leadership of President Biden and Democrats here in the Congress. Last week, a report showed that consumer sentiment surged by nearly 30% over the last 2 months. And Americans received even more good news this week. The American economy far exceeded expectations in the last quarter of 2023, growing at a rate of 3.3% and avoiding even a hint of a recession. The hard right predicted that Democrats' investments would drive our country to a recession. But today, American families are seeing more money in their pockets, low unemployment, and inflation cooling down. The bottom line is that the American economy is headed in the right direction, thanks to Democrats investing in our infrastructure, increasing manufacturing through chips and science, and lifting our country from crisis through the American Rescue Plan. And I'm proud to say in all three, Senate Democrats, whether in the minority or majority, played a leading role. The economy is now on an upswing, so much so that Republicans and even the former president are trying to take credit. After the Dow Jones and S&P hit record highs last week, Donald Trump deployed a spin job for the ages, calling it the Trump stock market. You can't make that up. 4 years ago, Donald Trump predicted the stock market would crash if he lost the election. Well, Donald Trump did lose the election. But today, the stock market is setting record highs. It's both laughable and very telling that Donald Trump is trying to take credit for the successes of President Biden and the congressional Democrats. Donald Trump knows his disastrous and chaotic record can't stand scrutiny against the jobs, increased wages, and investments secured by Democrats. And of course, Donald Trump is hardly the only Republican taking credit for Democrats' successes. Around the country, scores of congressional Republicans are attending groundbreakings. They're going to ribbon-cutting ceremonies and factory openings for projects they voted against in Congress, but the Democrats in the House and Senate prevailed. Last week, a Minnesota GOP congressman shared the announcement of $1 billion for a new bridge in his district, saying he was proud to have worked with my Minnesota and Wisconsin congressional colleagues to secure this critical investment. There's only one problem. 2 years ago, this very GOP member voted against the infrastructure bill that provided these funds, stating at the time, "I will not be complicit in paving a destructive and irreversible path towards socialism." Well, there he was at the bridge. There he was at the bridge. A few days later, another GOP congresswoman from Florida tried to take credit on air for $40 million in funding that came from bills she voted against in Congress, including the CHIPS and Science bill, which I was proud to have authored. I hope she'll give me a pat on the back. When pressed on her voting record, her excuse was she didn't remember her vote. This is going to be a pattern we're going to see all year long. Without any accomplishments on their own to talk about, Republicans in the House and Senate will try to take credit for jobs and investments they opposed in Congress. Well, that's the difference, Mr. President, between the Democratic and Republican agenda. Democrats are working hard to lower costs, increase wages, and fuel economic growth, while Republicans are creating chaos and then taking credit for our work. If Republicans want to keep claiming credit, I encourage them, work with us, pass bipartisan legislation, and then you can proudly go to these events without contradiction. We still have a long way to go to make our economy work better for families, so there'll be plenty of opportunities for Republicans to work with us. I yield the floor. Well, Mr. President, the sun may be shining outside, but today is a gloomy day here in the United States Senate. Last night, members of the other side of the aisle met to decide whether they were going to side with the American people or obey the wishes of former President Trump and his friend, Vladimir Putin. While I was not party to that meeting, the reports that came out of it were disturbing, to say the least. After months of good faith negotiations, after months of giving Republicans many of the things they asked for, Leader McConnell and the Republican conference are ready to kill the national security supplemental package, even with the border provisions they so fervently demanded. Those reports are disturbing because this is a good bill, a bipartisan bill, that will address the problems at the border directly, expeditiously, seriously. And don't take my word for it. Just ask the conservative editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, who called this, quote, a border bill worth passing, or the president of the National Border Patrol Council, who rarely sides with Democrats, who called this bill far better than the status quo, or the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, whose president, a fervent Trump ally, called this package a common-sense measure and warned that Congress cannot afford to ignore these problems any longer. So, Mr. President, last night's reports coming from the Republican conference meeting are alarming because they represent a dramatic transformation in Republican thought. In October, Republicans objected to President Biden's national security supplemental request, telling the world they could not consider it without, in Leader McConnell's words, something credible on the border. He said his conference would give, quote, this supplemental request a serious look and probably recommend some changes as well, quote. That was October 22nd, 2023. Since then, senators on both sides of the aisle have conducted intense, good-faith negotiations to try to find a way forward on border. We thought we were close in December, but some on the other side did not want to be, quote, jammed by the Christmas holiday. So we gave them more time. Senator Graham reasoned that a delay was necessary and thought that President Biden, quote, should get involved in border immigration negotiations, unquote. Well, President Biden did get involved, and he gave Senator Graham the more time that he asked for. And yet again yesterday, he asked for more time once again. In December, Senator Fisher accused Democrats of not wanting to address border security, saying, quote, my Democratic colleagues support border security for Taiwan, they support border security for Ukraine, and they support border security for Israel. But what they won't support is basic border security for the United States of America. We are told that our own border security is not related to the National Security Supplemental. That's absurd. That's what she said. That's absurd not to have border security in the bill in December. Well, yesterday, she said she would refuse to even debate a bill that addressed our national security and border security. Not even a debate. The entire process has been quite a roller coaster. And it's not just my Senate colleagues who keep moving the goalposts. In November, Speaker Johnson said, quote, with our appropriations bills for Ukraine funding, for example, we're going to marry that to border security. These two things are going to be handled together because we believe it's a top priority, end of quote. But when former President Trump said he didn't want Republicans to solve the border problem, that he wanted it as a campaign issue, Speaker Johnson did a 180-degree about-face and obediently and obeisantly changed his tune. Now, Mr. President, I understand politics. I understand electoral strategy. But for more than a year, members on the other side of the aisle have been wailing that the border was an emergency situation, that the country was in urgent crisis. As the senior senator from Wyoming said, quote, this crisis requires swift, serious, and substantive action. Or like the senior senator from Texas said, the current crisis cries out for a solution, and nobody believes the status quo is acceptable. Or how about the words of Speaker Johnson just 1 month ago? Just a month ago, he said, the time to act on the border is yesterday. This morning, Republicans are singing a new tune. Suddenly, this crisis is not so urgent. Suddenly, we need to take even more time before we address this crisis. One hard-right Republican member of the House even ridiculously suggested that we wait until after November. This morning, a member of the Republican leadership who had recently called for swift action now says that action must wait until after the election, the next election. Give me a break. Today, This is the new Republican line on the border. It's an emergency, but it can wait 12 months or till the end of time. What utter bunk. A cynic might suggest that this request for more time was a political ploy. But maybe we should take the Republicans at their word. Maybe we should take them at their word when they say there is absolutely no reason to agree to policies that will further enable Joe Biden. Or when they say, let me tell you, I'm not willing to do damn much right now to help a Democrat. That is why, Mr. President, this is a gloomy day. That is why the Republican Party is being thrown into disrepute by many of its own members back in the States. Some Republicans will claim they have not had enough time to read the bill. Some Republicans will claim that they want an amendment process. Some will claim that they want guarantees their amendments will be accepted. Some Republicans will claim we need more time for debate and consideration. My guess is they'll ultimately want 10 to 12 months. Finally, some Republicans will claim that we should separate, new tune, separate border solutions from funding for Ukraine. I'd like to address each of those claims right here, right now. For those who've claimed they have not had enough time to read the bill, on January 25th, 10 Republican senators wrote me a letter. In fact, I'd like to introduce the letter into the congressional record.
Without objection.
In that letter, Senators Ricketts, Barrasso, Cassidy, Cotton, Ernst, Graham, Mullen, Sullivan, Risch, and Wicker asked one thing of me before the first vote on legislation. They asked for 72 hours to read the bill. Mr. President, we've met that request. The bill was posted at 6:45 p.m. on Sunday, February 4th, and if they want until 6:45 tomorrow evening, that's fine with me. Actually, Mr. President, I will even offer to delay that vote until sometimes on Thursday, to give even more time for senators to make up their minds. But I suspect they won't accept even that offer, because they really don't want more time. They're just using it as an excuse. In fact, it will surprise no one that some of the signers of that letter actually did not wait 72 hours before they rejected the bill. Senator Cotton declared his opposition after 16 hours, 48 minutes, less than 25% of the requested time. Senator Risch took a little longer, an additional 15 minutes to read the bill before announcing his opposition. Clearly, this wasn't about having 72 hours. That's okay. I can recognize when senators grandstand, but this is no time for grandstanding. This is a time for serious people to work together to solve serious problems. Mr. President, senators are elected to vote, not to be afraid, run away, make excuses when it comes to voting on the tough issues. Senators are elected to debate and deliberate, not just to say no when a former president instructs them to. Just make speeches. If my colleagues want more time, fine. All they have to do is vote yes tomorrow. That will mean the Senate will have up to 30 hours of debate before we lay down the motion to proceed. Again, I want to be clear. The vote tomorrow is not about the substance of the bill. No one is being asked to take a position on the supplemental tomorrow. The only thing a yes vote would allow is for the Senate to simply begin to consider, discuss, and debate the vitally important issues before us now. And we'll have plenty of time to do so because we will stay here in session as long as it takes. That brings me to the Republicans' second claim. They want an amendment process. Well, during my time as Majority Leader, I've presided over more amendment votes than the Senate held in all 4 years of the Trump administration. So I'd like to remind my colleagues about Senate procedure. If you want a chance to amend a bill, it turns out you actually need to get on the bill first.
Voting no says no amendments. And further, once we are on the bill, you still possess the power to kill the entire bill if the amendment process is not to your liking. You can hold out for your amendments. You can hold out if you want to reread the bill again and again. And you can hold out if your amendments fail. But our Republican colleagues, we know this, really don't want any of those things. And when they won't, they forfeit their ability to address the border situation at all. When they vote no, they forfeit their ability to address the border situation at all. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote yes on the bill so we can discuss amendments, timing, and any other issues. The issues in Ukraine, in Israel, humanitarian aid, the South Pacific, and the border are urgent. And so many of my colleagues have said they are urgent. Well, let's vote. It's urgent. We've spent months talking and debating. It's time to vote. Make no mistake about it. A no vote says, I never want to move forward on the border, not with amendments, not without amendments, not now, not later. We must move forward. We cannot wait any longer. We have waited long enough. Now, for my Republican colleagues who say that we need more time to debate and consider the bill and I don't want to be jammed, I have a question. In September, you told us we cannot provide support to the people in Ukraine without addressing the border crisis. In December, you told us that leaving for Christmas break was more important than solving the border crisis. Now in February, you're telling us you need more time. So, the question I'd like answered, and that the American people want an answer to, is this. What date would work, my Republican friends? If you don't want to solve the border crisis and fight Putin today or tomorrow, when do you want it? Would Saturday, the 24th of February be a good day for you? The day that marks the second anniversary of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, so it can have symbolic value? And since that falls on a weekend, maybe we could vote on Monday the 26th. Just let me know. We can schedule it. We have other options. You just have to tell us what day would work. We can change the schedule. But we are voting to move to proceed Wednesday night, or if you want the extra day, Thursday. Would you be willing to address those tough issues in March, in April, in June, in July? Mr. President, I suppose I won't get a response because it seems the only date Republicans seem to care about is November 5th, Election Day. We all know what's going on here. Donald Trump would rather keep the chaos at the border so he can exploit it on the campaign trail instead of letting the Senate do the right thing and fix it. He would rather let Ukraine suffer on the battlefield instead of being tough on Putin. And instead of standing up to Donald Trump, Senate Republicans are ready to kill our best chance at fixing the border and ready to vote down this aid package for Ukraine in order to put what they think is their party's political interest above the interests of the country. It is my hope, but not my expectation, that my friends across the aisle will resist the former president's exhortation and do what is right. That is why the Senate will move forward with our vote tomorrow. If senators vote yes, we have options. More time to debate, opportunity to consider amendments. If senators vote no, those senators should have to explain why they're ready to let the border emergency, which they've so decried, why would they let it continue? We've had 4 months dithering, of delay. Tomorrow, the American people will find out whether senators seek border security and oppose Russian expansionism, or whether they stand with former President Trump in support of the chaos and Vladimir Putin. Yield the floor. Now on the border. Today, President Biden will visit the U.S. border at Brownsville, Texas,
where he'll meet with local leaders and border enforcement agents. 300 miles up the Rio Grande, Donald Trump is expected to visit the border at Eagle Pass, Texas. When President Biden and Donald Trump visit the border today, Americans will see a glaring contrast between a sitting president who negotiated the strongest border bill we've seen in years and a former president exploiting the border for political gain and making sure nothing gets done. President Biden knows the border is a serious problem, so look at what he's done. He sat down with Republicans to draft the strongest, most comprehensive border security bill America has seen in decades, and we worked with him here in the Senate to make that happen. Let me say again, President Biden knows the border is a serious problem, and that's why he sat down with Republicans to draft the strongest, most comprehensive border bill America has seen in decades. But what did Donald Trump do? Donald Trump deliberately sabotaged the very same border reforms he spent years calling for, because he wants to exploit the border for the campaign trail. He explicitly took credit for the bill going down. Please blame it on me. Those were his words. It was Donald Trump who sabotaged the bill with dramatic updates to asylum. It was Donald Trump who sabotaged a bill that reformed parole authority. It was Donald Trump who sabotaged the bill that provided new resources to Border Patrol agents, and it was Donald Trump who sabotaged the bill endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and the Chamber of Commerce, hardly liberal groups. So when Donald Trump goes in front of the cameras to lament the mess at the border, he should look in the mirror. He should look in the mirror, because he's the one who tanked the best chance we've seen in ages to fix it. Until Donald Trump said oppose it, it would have passed here in the Senate and even in the House. And when Republicans in Congress say they will shut the government down or bring the legislative process to a halt unless we fund the border, that is bull, because they are the ones who blocked a deal. Republicans are the one exacerbating the border by pushing things like H.R. 2, which not only didn't get a single Democratic vote, it wouldn't even solve the problem. It wouldn't even solve the problem. And again, as I've reminded Speaker Johnson over and over again, you can't do anything without bipartisanship when we have divided government. So to simply write what you want and put it for a vote when it gets no Democratic votes is a path to not solving the problem, but in a sense doing the same thing Donald Trump did. Use it for political purposes. Say the problem isn't solved for political purposes when you're the ones who prevented the problem from being solved. Republicans cannot claim to be serious about fixing the border while voting against the very same border policies they've spent years calling for. Republicans can't be serious about fixing the border when they say it's an emergency, and then when they have a chance to stop it, they refuse for crass political purposes. That is what happened in the last few weeks, and Democrats will make sure the American people know it. Democrats' agenda, of course, is paying off in other ways. Americans are paying less for insulin. Prescription drugs for seniors on Medicare have been capped. Student loan borrowers are seeing hundreds of billions in debt forgiveness. So tonight, the difference between the parties will be as clear as night and day. Democrats are focused on lowering costs, creating jobs, putting money in people's pockets. But the hard right, which too often runs the Republican Party in the House and now increasingly in the Senate, is consumed by chaos, bullying, and attacking things like women's freedom of choice. The Republican frontrunner for president has made it abundantly clear that he's not running to make people's lives better, but rather on airing his personal political grievances. Donald Trump's cynical power grab even destroyed the best change at border security that Congress has seen in decades, a bill that even a Wall Street Journal poll from this morning shows that Americans clearly supported. Americans wanted bipartisan border security. Congress had bipartisan security ready to go. And Donald Trump and his MAGA Republican followers are at fault for killing it in its tracks. That is shameful cynicism that once again hurts America. Ideologues cannot run the show here. We have to fight these things. So I thank President Biden for his leadership. The road hasn't been easy. The work is not yet done, but we have come far. We have overcome so much. And with still so much on the line for American families, American values, and America's future, it's imperative we stay the course and finish the job we began 3 years ago. Mr. President, today Leader McConnell and I will be honored to welcome Andrzej Duda, the President of Poland, to the Senate. President Duda arrives to the United States at a critical moment for American leadership and a critical moment for the war in Ukraine. It has been nearly a month since the Senate passed a bipartisan national security supplemental with 70 votes in support. This supplemental package is a lifeline for Ukraine's survival, the only package on the table with enough resources to stop Russia's advance and help Ukraine reclaim the offensive. According to a CNN report yesterday, right now Russia is producing three times more artillery shells than the U.S. and Europe. In a very real sense, the war will turn on who can produce and deliver more munitions, which is what this supplemental will do. I thank President Duda for his visit, and I thank him for being a staunch defender of the Ukrainian war effort. His support for Ukraine shows that the war in Russia has stakes that extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. It implicates the very survival of Western democracy. A little less than a month ago, I joined with Senators Reid, Blumenthal, Hassan, and Bennett to travel to Eastern Europe, not just to Ukraine, but to Poland, where we met with the U.S. ambassador and U.S. military leaders. We met with U.S. military officials just a short distance from the Russian border. And the military official told us, Senator, without U.S. aid, Russia would control the territory we're standing on now, period. Imagine that. Russia would control that territory without the aid. That's what they said. The consequences of a victorious Putin are very plain. If he succeeds in taking Ukraine, he's not going to stop there. What Putin wants is to destabilize the NATO alliance and permanently undo the balance of power that has kept the peace since World War II and since the end of the Cold War. That's why it's a matter of highest urgency that Speaker Johnson and House leadership put the Senate's bipartisan supplemental package on the House floor. Because if he does, mark my words, it will pass. If he puts it on the floor, it will pass. House Republicans need to do the right thing and answer democracy's cry for help. House Republicans must show the world with whom it is that they cast their lot, those who support freedom and democracy, and hopefully not those who bow down to autocrats. Last Friday, former President Trump met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban at Mar-a-Lago for what one source called a friendly visit. A few days later, Orban said during a Hungarian interview that Trump's position on the war in Ukraine is, quote, very clear, unquote, that, quote, first, he will not give a single penny for the Russo-Ukrainian war. That's why the war will end, because it's obvious Ukraine can't stand on its own 2 feet. That's Orban, Trump's friend, saying just what Trump will do. I hope our Republican colleagues hear that and heed the message. It's disgusting that Donald Trump fraternizes with thugs like Orban, who openly cheer for Putin to win. It's even worse that so many extreme Republicans in Congress are doing Trump's bidding by stalling Ukraine aid here in Congress. That's not a majority of Republicans, but too many just go along. That is the shame of it. You can be sure that the Chinese Communist Party is taking note of House Republicans who are thwarting American support for a friend in need and assessing what that means for their own ambitions in the South Pacific. I guarantee it. History will not be kind to those who turn their backs on American values in this pivotal moment. That's why the supplemental must get done. The Speaker must do the right thing and put the supplemental on the floor of the House, because it will pass. The clock is ticking. Failure right now only guarantees America will pay a much higher price down the line. I'd like to begin today by addressing the reprehensible and dangerous comments made yesterday by former President Trump. The former president's comments were utterly disgusting and a textbook example of the kind of anti-Semitism facing Jews, pushing the dangerous anti-Semitism trope of dual loyalty. To say you hate Israel or your religion, excuse me, to say you hate Israel or your religion because you have one political view over the other is sick, it's hateful. It is unadulterated anti-Semitism, and it serves to use Israel as a political wedge, further damaging the bonds between U.S. and Israel. I've always tried through the years to keep everything we do on Israel bipartisan, and to use it for partisan purposes hurts Israel, hurts America, and displays how low Donald Trump would go. And nobody who breaks bread with anti-Semites like Nick Fuentes and who called white supremacists in Charlottesville very good people, or who, as was recently reported, said disgustingly that Hitler did some good things, has any right to lecture Jewish Americans about their personal political beliefs. I condemn the former president's irresponsible comments and urge others from both sides, to do the same. Yesterday, former President Trump reminded the entire country that if there's anyone to blame for the annihilation of Roe v. Wade and the grotesque reversal of women's personal freedoms, it is Donald Trump and the Republican Party. On Truth Social yesterday, the former president said he was, quote, proudly the person responsible for putting radical jurists on the Supreme Court for the explicit purpose of overturning Roe. Let me repeat that so all of America knows the real truth. Former President Trump said yesterday he was, quote, proudly the person responsible, unquote, for putting radical jurists on the Supreme Court for the explicit purpose of overturning Roe. Does anyone think that should Trump become president again, he won't try again to add even more extreme jurists to the bench so he can continue his assault on women's reproductive freedoms? To this day, Donald Trump continues to boast of his extreme views on the right to choose. And we all remember his support for a national abortion ban, no matter how much he might want people to forget. People won't. The president of the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America, a major anti-abortion rights group, reminded everyone yesterday that they will still support Donald Trump because when push comes to shove, they know, should former President Trump return to office, he will continue supporting a federal abortion ban and continue to erode women's rights. After all, this is the President Trump. This is the Donald Trump who, when he was president in the past, said women who seek reproductive care deserve to be punished. That's what he said. They deserve to be punished. And that's the bottom line. If Republicans get into power, they will not hesitate to push for a national abortion ban. Many Republicans in both chambers have been on record supporting a national abortion ban for years. A national abortion ban, for instance, was included in the Republican Study Committee budget released just 2 weeks ago, an organization that counts the majority of House Republicans, including their leadership, as members. So Republicans cannot hide from this. Republicans know that their views are dangerously out of step with the public. Here in Congress, Republicans have claimed to support access to IVF and paid lip service to supporting women's access to reproductive services. But Americans know actions speak louder than words. Not 1 month ago, Senate Republicans blocked legislation to preserve IVF, and Speaker Johnson has publicly opposed federal action protecting it. So, Republicans and Donald Trump can try to hide their anti-abortion records all they want, but the American people will see right through it, today, tomorrow, and in November. Mr. President, former President Trump reminded us just a few days ago that he is to blame for the grotesque reversal of women's personal freedom He said it himself. He said he is, quote, proudly the person responsible for the annihilation of Roe v. Wade. Let me repeat those words because the American people need to hear it over and over again. Donald Trump said, quote, he's proudly the person responsible, unquote, for ending Roe. And yesterday, we saw just another consequence of a post-Roe America. The Arizona Supreme Court upheld a Civil War-era law banning abortion almost entirely, without exception for rape or for incest. The Arizona Supreme Court decision goes as far to suggest that doctors can be prosecuted for assisting in an abortion. All these regressive MAGA judges on the Supreme Court, in some of the other federal courts, and in the state courts, all come from Donald Trump and he appointing MAGA judges and his goal to restrict women's freedoms and to have Roe v. Wade be annihilated. Make no mistake about it, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans own the consequences of the Arizona Supreme Court decision. And does anyone seriously doubt that should Trump become president again, he won't try to add even more extreme jurists to the bench so he can continue his assault on women's reproductive freedoms? Of course they will. If Trump and MAGA Republicans get into power, they would see to it that reproductive freedoms are curtailed even more from the local level to the national level. Even in his remarks the other day, where he's trying to cover up what he did, he couldn't resist saying he's proudly the person responsible for annihilation of Roe v. Wade. Couldn't resist, because that's where he's at. We know that. And don't take it from me. House Republicans included a national abortion ban in the Republican Study Committee budget. And remember, the Republican Study Committee includes a majority of House Republicans and their leadership. And they came out for a national abortion ban. On IVF, Republicans try to talk a good game about supporting access to reproductive services. But not 1 month ago, Republicans blocked legislation in this chamber that would have preserved IVF protections under federal law. And while Donald Trump hopes people forget it, he himself was on record supporting a national abortion ban when he was president. So, unsurprisingly, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are now trying to hide their anti-abortion records because they know how dangerously out of step their views are with the public. But they can't help themselves, as the president's speech showed 4 days ago. Again, he had to repeat that he was responsible, the one responsible for the abolition of Roe. Make no mistake, that's what they'll do. And make no mistake, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans will have to answer to the American people for what they have done to fundamental liberties in this country today, tomorrow, and in November. On the border. Mr. President, precisely 3 months ago, something truly stunning happened here on the Senate floor. Senate Republicans filibustered the strongest, most comprehensive border security bill Congress has seen in a generation. They did it for one reason only: Donald Trump, hell-bent on using the border for political gain, told them to do so. The situation at the border is unacceptable. Everyone knows that. Senate Democrats know it, the President knows it, and the American people know it too. So a few months ago, as senators worked on the supplemental, Democrats tried to find a long-sought solution to America's broken immigration system. Again, Democrats have made clear the situation at the border is unacceptable. That's why for months we sat down with Republicans to craft the strongest border security bill in a generation, endorsed by the Border Patrol Union, very conservative. I salute Senators Murphy and Sinema and Langford for working so hard on that bill. But Donald Trump told Republicans to kill the bill because, and he was explicit, he wants to exploit the chaos at the border for political gain. He even said, quote, "Blame it, please, blame it on me." He explicitly took credit for this tough border bill to go down, a bill that the Wall Street Journal editorial page called a border bill worth passing. they're horribly left-wing liberals, that the Chamber of Commerce said was a common-sense measure, and which the president of the National Border Patrol Council called far better than the status quo, unquote. You'd think, given the chance to pass the strongest border bill in decades, that Republicans would have pounced at the opportunity. After all, how many times have we heard our Republican colleagues give speeches here on the floor about the emergency at the border? How many times have we heard Republicans say year after year that Congress must act? How many times have we seen Republicans take field trips down to the border, taking pictures with the fence towering behind them, while bemoaning that the problem's only getting worse? Apparently, that was all for show, because precisely 3 months ago, right here on the floor, Senate Republicans, in obeisance to Donald Trump, and I believe many of them knew he was wrong, but Senate Republicans on the Senate floor killed the best chance we've seen in decades to provide a solution to the border. It's pretty simple. Republicans can't say that the border is an emergency, but then refuse to take action. Republicans cannot claim to care about fixing asylum, but then block the biggest changes to asylum law in decades. Republicans cannot claim to care about our Border Patrol agents, but then deprive them of the very tools and funding the Border Patrol has been asking for. Our Republican colleagues may have given up on taking real action on the border, but Democrats have not. Democrats will make it clear which party is working to fix our broken border and which party is conspiring to make the border worse. We will challenge our Republican colleagues to join us once again on the border reforms Americans demand, to stop the flow of fentanyl, to improve asylum and vetting, and to assure our border agents have the tools that they need. Mr. President, let me read a few quotes from the last 6 months about securing our southern border from some of my Republican Senate colleagues. Quote, "This crisis requires swift, serious, and substantive action." Unquote. Quote, "It makes no sense for us to do nothing when we might be able to make things better." Unquote. And quote, "This moment will pass. Do not let it pass." Unquote. Yes, indeed. These are words, Mr. President, of our Republican Senate colleagues, uttered at press conferences and floor speeches and interviews from just the last few months. There are many, many, many more quotes like these going back years from Republican senators, Republican Congress members, from the Speaker, from Republican speakers, from the former Republican president. We kept hearing the same thing again and again and again. "We need to do something about the border now," they shouted. "The border's an emergency," they screamed. "We cannot put this off until tomorrow," and on and on and on. So, 3 months ago, here on the floor, Republicans got a chance to back up their angry words with real action by voting on the strongest bipartisan border bill Congress has seen in decades. And practically every Republican voted no, including my Republican colleague who said it makes sense to do nothing. Then he voted no. Including my Republican colleague who said this crisis requires swift action. He voted no. And the Republican Speaker, Johnson, who said at the time, he said, quote, "The time to act," unquote, on the border is yesterday. And then told the whole world that our bipartisan border bill would die in the House if we sent it over to them. Donald Trump has spent years bellyaching and bemoaning the problems at the border. But when Congress finally reached a breakthrough on a strong and bipartisan border bill, he told his MAGA acolytes to kill it so he could exploit the chaos at the border for political gain. He was bold and open about that. He wanted to exploit the chaos at the border for his own political gain. That's cynical even for Republicans, even maybe for Donald Trump, whose cynicism knows no bounds. For Democrats, the situation at the border is utterly unacceptable. That's why we worked with our Republican colleagues for months to write the strongest border security bill Congress has seen in a generation, a bill that had the support of the Border Patrol Union and the Chamber of Commerce and the extremely conservative Wall Street Journal editorial board. But Donald Trump, desperate to exploit the border for the campaign trail, torpedoed this bill right in its tracks. He knew it would take real action to secure our border. That's why he didn't want it to happen. Republicans will go on and on about the border this year, but their rhetoric, their political ads, everything else will ring hollow because the border bill they killed in Congress will linger over them like stink on garbage.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, on the border, when it comes to fixing our southern border, the American people demand that elected representatives prioritize action over rhetoric. It's the easiest thing in the world to do what many Republicans have done this year and done year after year. Come to the floor, complain that the border is a mess, and then do just about nothing to fix the problem. It's the easiest thing in the world to do what Donald Trump and his followers have perfected over the years. Demonize immigrants, pay lip service to our border agents, but ignore the work required to make change happen. Democrats know that the situation at the border is unacceptable. We know that the status quo cannot continue. But Democrats also know that fixing the border requires bipartisan legislation from Congress. 6 months ago, Democrats sat down with our Republican colleagues to get to work on drafting the strongest border security bill Congress has seen in decades. It contained many of the biggest issues that our Republican colleagues have demanded: fixes to asylum, more money for border agents, and it increased the president's emergency powers to respond to high numbers of border crossings. Our bipartisan bill was the closest Congress has been in decades to fixing our southern border, until Donald Trump blew it all up for political gain. I've seen many cynical things around here over the years, but it's hard to think of something more cynical than Republicans blowing up their own border deal in order to help Donald Trump win an election because they think chaos will help them win. After all, how many times have we heard from Republicans that we need to fix asylum? How many times did we hear Donald Trump say that our asylum system was archaic and that what, quote, Democrats should be doing now is changing the loopholes? That's Trump. Trump said that. How many times did we hear our Republican colleagues say on the floor things like, quote, we've got to redo our asylum laws, unquote, as my colleague from Florida has said? If my Republican colleagues care about fixing asylum, why did they vote to kill the best chance we've seen in decades to fix it? If my Republican colleagues care about our border agents, why did they vote against a bill that would have hired 1,500 more agents and given them more tools to stop the flow of drugs and weapons? If my Republican colleagues truly believe the system is broken, why did they vote against a bill that would have provided more immigration judges, more asylum officers, and had the support of the very conservative Border Patrol Union? 2 words is why: Donald Trump. It was Donald Trump who didn't like that Congress has finally reached a deal on border that would have taken away a key issue for him on the campaign trail. It was Donald Trump who made clear that exploiting the border is great, but actually fixing the problem is not. I know this is a frustrating issue for millions of Americans. Many of us who want to solve the problem on both sides of the aisle are frustrated as well. Republicans are going on and on and on about the border, but facts are stubborn things. When Americans ask this year who is to blame for the continued mess at the border, they should listen to the words that came from Donald Trump himself. He said, please, blame it on me. That's what Trump said. On taxes. Yesterday, the CBO released a new report that should be a shot across the bow for Republicans who supported the disastrous 2017 Trump tax cuts. The CBO reported that extending all of the Trump tax cuts, which Republicans support and Donald Trump has promised to do if elected, would add a whopping $4.6 trillion to the deficit. That's $4.6 trillion. Let me say that again. An extension of all of the Trump tax cuts would add a whopping $4.6 trillion to the deficit. To the self-proclaimed fiscal hawks on the right, who always complain about deficits, this CBO report about the Trump tax cuts is like a pie in the face. This report should come as no surprise. We all saw what happened when Donald Trump and Republicans first pushed their tax cuts a few years ago. They blew a nearly $2 trillion hole in our deficit. They left American families out to dry, with no trickle-down stemming from the benefits for the very wealthy and the largest corporations. The Trump tax cuts were a dud for our economy and a political loser at the same time for the Republican Party. So I ask my Republican colleagues, are they really willing to double down on the disastrous Trump tax law and blow a $4.6 trillion hole in our deficit? Are my Republican colleagues, who claim to be the party of fiscal responsibility, so desperate to help the very wealthiest few and large corporations that they'd add another $4.6 trillion to the deficit? Do my Republican colleagues believe so deeply in giveaways to the ultra-wealthy that they would let programs like Social Security and Medicare, which millions of Americans rely on every day, would they let them run dry? If nothing else, this shows how out of touch Republicans are this shows how out of touch Republicans are with working and middle-class America. The American people don't want tax cuts that overwhelmingly favor the wealthiest few and corporations. They want a fair and equal tax code that works for everybody. While Republicans keep pushing terrible tax giveaways for the wealthy and cuts to Social Security and Medicare, Democrats continue to deliver meaningful results for the American people. This week, for instance, we learned that U.S. will triple its domestic chip manufacturing by 2032, thanks to our CHIPS and Science Act. This is great news for both American jobs and the American economy. It's exactly what we envisioned when we were working on the bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act, a new wave of tech jobs, a new wave of scientific research, and a revival of federal investment in the technologies of the future. Under President Biden and Democratic leadership, America is on the right track. Mr. President, tomorrow will be 100 days since Senate Republicans blocked the strongest border security bill we've seen in a generation. For the last 2 weeks, I've come to the floor with my Democratic colleagues, calling on both sides to set partisanship aside and work together to fix the problems on our southern border. America is proudly a nation of immigrants. We always have been, we always will be. Most Americans know our country is made stronger because of immigration, but they also know the current condition of border security is simply not acceptable. It's a problem going back many years, going back many administrations. After decades of neglect, our border security needs an update. Our immigration rules need reform to provide more opportunity and fairness and humane treatment of those who seek opportunity in America. And the only way we fix the border long-term is through bipartisan legislation. Let me say it again. The only way we fix the border long-term is through bipartisan legislation, like the one we had in the Senate 3 months ago. The Bipartisan Border Act was precisely the kind of proposal Republicans and Democrats have been trying to produce for years. It contained the strongest border security provisions in a generation. It would have overhauled our asylum laws, hired thousands of new border agents, invested in cutting-edge technology to stop the flow of fentanyl, and given the president new authorities to close the border. Now, of course, our bipartisan border bill wasn't perfect. Not every Democrat supported this bill. But unlike other border bills, it was designed to pass both chambers in divided government. If our border security bill was good enough to win the support of the actual Border Patrol agents, shouldn't have been good enough to win the support of Senate Republicans. And speaking candidly, when our bill was first released, many of our Republican colleagues were surprised with how strong it was, even if only in private. I dare say a significant percentage of the Republican caucus would have supported it. If both chambers would have voted on our bill without outside interference, I'm confident it would have passed and reached the president's desk. But, as we all know, Donald Trump swooped in and told his MAGA supporters to kill the bill. In fact, he was proud to kill it. Quote, "Please blame it on me," unquote, he said. Those were Trump's words after our bill went down, and I certainly don't think it's very smart of him to brag about killing an issue most people want to see fixed. Donald Trump treats this like a game, but most Americans just want to see the border fixed regardless of who does it. Democrats have not walked away from trying to get something done on the border. We want to work with our Republican colleagues on border security, just as we showed we were serious when we worked with them earlier this year. But our Republican colleagues must show they are ready to match their border rhetoric with real action. If Republicans are going to call the border an emergency, they can't suddenly kick the can down the road and say we can deal with this later. They can't put up a partisan bill that they know has no chance of passing. Americans don't want just talk, talk, talk on the border. Americans want action. Americans want bipartisanship. Americans want to pass the border security bill like the one we released 3 months ago. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum. Now on the border. 3 months ago, Madam President, 3 months ago, Senate Republicans blocked the strongest, most comprehensive border security bill we've seen in a generation. This week, Republicans will get another chance to do the right thing. Border security, we all know, is one of the most contentious issues that we have to wrestle with in Congress. But most people agree the status quo cannot continue. Our southern border is in desperate need of more resources, and our immigration system is in serious need of repair. President Biden in recent weeks has taken many actions to increase sanctions against human rights abusers, reform asylum, and enhance drug enforcement to the maximum extent his office allows. But, as our Republican colleagues have said for years, the only long-term solution to the border is bipartisan legislation from Congress. Well, there is good news. Such bipartisan legislation does exist and is ready to go. I'm talking, of course, about the Bipartisan Border Act negotiated earlier this year by Senators Murphy and Sinema and Langford, and endorsed by the National Border Patrol Council, the Chamber of Commerce, and the very conservative Wall Street Journal editorial page. This week, the Senate will have an opportunity to move again on this bill. For the information of my colleagues, tomorrow I plan to file cloture on the motion to proceed to the Bipartisan Border Act. The Senate will then vote on our bipartisan border bill on Thursday. All those who say we need to act on the border will get a chance this week to show they're serious about fixing the problem. Let me repeat. The Senate will vote on our bipartisan border bill on Thursday. All those who say we need to act on the border will get a chance this week to show they're serious about fixing the border. I implore my Republican colleagues to join us in advancing this bill. We're going to need bipartisan support if there's any hope of getting this bill done. I will be clear. We do not expect every Democrat or every Republican to come out in favor of the bill. But as I've said before, over and over again, the only way to pass this bill is with broad bipartisan support. I expect to see that on the Democratic side, and I hope we'll see it on the Republican side as well. This bill was written explicitly with the goal of getting support from both parties, unlike messaging bills like H.R. 2, which did not have bipartisan support to get through both chambers. And the bill we're voting on this Thursday is practically the same bill that Senators Murphy and Sinema and Langford and others negotiated 3 months ago. Republicans agreed to the substance of this bill. It is not at all some new measure or something that comes only from the Democratic side. The bill we'll vote on this Thursday reforms asylum, boosts staffing at the border, cracks down on drugs like fentanyl, and gives emergency powers to shut the border when crossings meet a certain threshold. All issues Republicans have said we must address. If our bipartisan border bill was good enough to win the support of the union that represents Border Patrol officers, it should be good enough to win the support of Senate Republicans. If you judge this bill by its substance and take out the partisanship injected by Donald Trump, it is objectively a tough, serious-minded, and critically a bipartisan solution to the border. In fact, when we released this bill earlier this year, many of our Republican colleagues were surprised at how strong it was, at least in private. For a short while, it seemed like we finally had a bill both parties could link arms on and pass together. Of course, we all know what happened. Donald Trump happened. He barged into the border debate and publicly came out against the bill, and the rest of his Republican supporters fell into place like dominoes. Let me be clear. The border bill did not fail 3 months ago because it was too weak. On the contrary, the border bill failed because it was too strong for Donald Trump's liking and risked taking away an issue he wanted to exploit on the campaign trail. He said that himself. Again, the border bill did not fail 3 months ago because it was too weak. It failed because it was too strong for Donald Trump's liking, and it risked taking away an issue he wanted to exploit on the campaign trail. As we all know, he was explicit about his intentions. He said, "Blame it on me," as if this was all one giant game to Donald Trump. He really doesn't care about the border, just cares about the politics and the gamesmanship. Well, we, the American people, do not have the luxury of playing games with border security. The issue is too important to ignore, and the bill we negotiated earlier this year is too good to pass up. So we're going to give Republicans another chance this week. In the words of one of my Senate Republican colleagues when we worked on the border bill earlier this year, "This moment will pass. Do not let it pass." I couldn't agree more.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I'd like to begin with a few words about Donald Trump's dangerous post last night on Truth Social. What Donald Trump said, falsely suggesting his political opponents are out to kill him, is beyond the pale and is the stuff that leads to political violence. Donald Trump seems to have no consideration for the sanctity and peacefulness and further functioning of our democracy. Everyone who was here on January 6th should immediately see what he's doing, what Donald Trump is doing, using conspiracy theories to spin the hard right into a frenzy. And it's despicable for members of Congress to spread Donald Trump's lies. This is how people get killed, how the seeds of political violence are sowed, and how people lose faith in this democracy. Donald Trump has no regard for that. He would basically rip up parts of our democracy for his own, what he thinks is his own personal gain. Let's speak truthfully. What the FBI did was follow standard practice. They worked with the Secret Service at Mar-a-Lago ahead of time to coordinate how to carry out a search warrant. Donald Trump wasn't even in Florida, but instead in New Jersey on the day of the search. So this idea that his political opponents are out to kill him is absurd. Every single member of the House and Senate, Democrat and Republican, should condemn Donald Trump's outlandish and dangerous statement. It should be the easiest thing they do today. If words like Donald Trump's are not fiercely condemned, we're only begging for something far worse to our democracy down the line. We cannot let this man, Donald Trump, or anybody else, throw these kinds of matches to light flames that could burn our democracy. It's just horrible. Can't believe that someone would do something like that. Okay, well, thank you, and I want to thank Senators Stabenow, Shaheen, Klobuchar, Schatz, Cortez Masto, got everybody, for organizing this important event. Senator Welch told me he might come in and join us as well, to talk about the need to pass our bipartisan border bill to crack down on the fentanyl entering our country. Tomorrow, senators will face an important decision. Will both sides come together to advance a bipartisan border security bill, or will partisanship get in the way once again? 3 months ago, Donald Trump told his Republican allies to block the strongest bipartisan border security bill Congress has seen in a whole generation. Luckily, we are trying again tomorrow, and I hope this time our Republicans join us to achieve a different outcome. Unlike H.R. 2, a partisan bill with no Democratic input, which got no Democratic votes when they first put it on the floor here, this bill was designed to get 60 votes and pass, which H.R. 2 was not. H.R. 2 was the truly political bill. Our bill had input from both Democrats and Republicans, which H.R. 2 can't claim. If anything's political, it's H.R. 2. So let's be perfectly clear. Our bipartisan border bill represents a real chance, in fact, the best chance in decades to act on border security. It will make huge strides in cracking down on the scourge called fentanyl. Every one of us in our states has talked to families who have lost particularly young people because of fentanyl, and it breaks your heart. Some of them didn't even know what they were taking had fentanyl, were dead within 24 hours. I've experienced that with some families. So we have to do something. And what would it do? It would deliver billions for DEA, for DHS, to hire officers, to focus exclusively on drugs, and billions for state-of-the-art equipment. We know how to stop this if we have the will to do it. And that would detect the flow of drugs at the border crossings and ports. Thanks to my Democratic colleagues who are here today. I thank them for highlighting how important this is for the bill. Our Republican friends are talking about the borders, close the borders, it has fentanyl. This bill will stop the flow of fentanyl in many large ways. Are they going to put their votes where their rhetoric is, or are they going to play politics? It's that simple. So I thank my colleagues for being here and look forward to moving this bill tomorrow on the floor. And just one final point. We don't expect every Democrat to vote for it. We don't expect every Republican. We want a broad bipartisan majority. We will get that among the Democratic side. We hope to get it on the Republican side, too. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. Thank you. Now on the border. Later today, President Biden is expected to issue an executive order addressing the problems happening at our southern border. As the President makes his announcement, let's be very clear about one thing. Legislation would have been the more effective way to go. President Biden has been clear from the beginning he prefers legislation, but given how obstinate Republicans have become, turning down any real opportunity for strong border legislation, the President is left with little choice but to act on his own. Republican intransigence has forced the President's hand. For years, Republicans insisted again and again and again that the border was in crisis. But when they had the opportunity to correct it, they killed the strongest bipartisan bill Congress has seen in decades. Why did they kill it? At the behest of Donald Trump, who said he wanted chaos at the border until after the election. Shame on our Republican friends. They say they want to protect the border. Donald Trump comes out with a very crass statement, let's keep in chaos so I might win the election. And they go along. They do a 180-degree turn. That's a disgrace. And it's forced President Biden to act the way he does, which is a lot better than doing nothing, but not as preferable as passing legislation, as the President admits. We had an opportunity to pass a strong bipartisan border bill back in February and just over a few weeks ago. Both times, Republicans put politics ahead of bipartisanship and blundered the best chance we have seen in decades to pass a border security bill America urgently needs. Americans will not easily forget it. I yield the floor, note the absence of a quorum. Yes, Manu.
Are you supporting Senator Menendez's independent bid to run for a Senate seat in New Jersey?
Look, the primary is today. I'm not even going to comment at this point.
Leader Schumer, do you think that Democrats have a problem with the southern border and messaging ahead of 2024? I mean, Republicans have said that this is basically a charade by the Biden administration, this executive action.
Look, the bottom line is that we all know what happened. Democrats supported a strong bipartisan bill. Republicans initially said this is a very strong, good bill, and then they turned around 180 degrees when Donald Trump was very explicit. He wanted the bill to fail to create chaos at the borders. Our preference is to have the Republicans join with us and support a strong bipartisan piece of legislation. Yes.
After the Trump guilty verdict in Manhattan, some of your Republican colleagues are throwing around terms like kangaroo court, weaponization of justice. Do you have any concerns about what things will look like after the election, and whether people will accept the results of the election?
Look, the jury has spoken in a process that jurors use throughout America, and Donald Trump has proven to be a felon, a convicted felon. Yes.
Is there any update on when the Senate might vote on Senator Whitehouse's Supreme Court ethics bill?
I'm talking to, look, first, Justice Roberts has been, in my opinion, not lived up to his responsibilities as Chief Justice. On issue after issue, he's supposed to be the guardian of the court's fairness and opinion. But on something near and dear to me, which is forum shopping, on ethics, on recusal, so Senator Durbin and I in the Judiciary Committee are discussing the best ways to move forward. Yes?
Are you going to try to meet with Speaker Johnson and try to negotiate some type of deal on border legislation?
Look, as I said, the Republicans turned down bipartisan border legislation that they had already agreed to. They ought to change their minds and support our bill. If not, President Biden has moved forward because he prefers legislation, we prefer legislation. The Republicans are blocking it, and so Biden is moving forward. Yes?
So the House passed their tax cut bill. Senator Wyden supports it. Are you going to force a vote on that before the end of the summer to put people on record?
Look, I support the tax cut bill. It has a lot of good things in it. But right now, Senator Crapo and a lot of the Republicans are opposing it. We hope they'll change their minds.
Senator Schumer,
thank you, everybody.
why did you come around to inviting him?
Finally, on the Trump visit. Later this afternoon, Senate Republicans will welcome former President Donald Trump to Capitol Hill for a meeting about some of the top priorities of the Republican agenda moving forward. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle predicted the meeting would be, quote, an expression of unity. Quote, an expression of unity, unquote? I'll be honest, Mr. President. It's getting harder and harder to differentiate between the Republicans' agenda and the extreme hard-right MAGA agenda. In many ways, they seem to be one and the same nowadays. The topics up for discussion between Senate Republicans and Donald Trump today read like Republicans' greatest hits: taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and more. But when you take a closer look under the hood, it's not difficult to see that these are issues where Republicans are way out of touch with the American people. Cutting taxes on the very wealthy and on corporations that don't pay their fair share, that's what they want to do? Social Security and Medicare, when 180 House members are part of a group that said we should cut them, and Rick Scott, running for leader from Florida, says we should cut Medicare and Social Security? Give us a break. If that's unity, the American people sure as heck don't want it. I yield the floor. Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Madam President, American democracy stands today at a perilous crossroads. 1 week ago, the 6 conservative justices on the Supreme Court undermined the most basic premise in our constitutional order, that no one is above the law. They incorrectly declared that former President Donald Trump enjoys broad immunity from criminal prosecution for actions he took while in office. They incorrectly declared that all future presidents are entitled to a breathtaking level of immunity, so long as their conduct is ostensibly carried out in their official capacity as president. They incorrectly declared, in effect, the same thing Richard Nixon told David Frost in 1977. Quote, Nixon said, when the president does it, it means it's not illegal. That's what the court, in effect, was saying. We were all taught in grade school that there are no kings here in America. But what the conservative justices have done is effectively place a crown on Donald Trump's head. In their judgment, the president is now free to behave however he likes, even to behave criminally, as long as he argues that he was acting as president. He is in many ways untouchable. The conservative majority's decision on immunity is the most un-American proposition, the very antithesis of what the framers envisioned. Presidential immunity is nowhere to be found in the Constitution, and this lawless ruling underscores just how hollow the conservative justices' commitment to originalism truly is. We Democrats will not let the Supreme Court's decision stand unaddressed. The Constitution makes plain that Congress has the authority to check the judiciary through appropriate legislation. I will work with my colleagues on legislation classifying Trump's election subversion acts as unofficial acts, not subject to immunity. We're doing this because we believe that in America, no president should be free to overturn an election against the will of the people, no matter what the conservative justices may believe. As we work on this important matter, we'll also keep working on other proposals to reassert Congress's Article I authority to rein in the abuse of our federal judiciary. The American people are tired, just tired, of justices who think they are beyond accountability. Now, the Supreme Court's ruling in Trump v. United States is just the finishing touch on one of the most destructive Supreme Court terms in modern history. A few days before the ruling on presidential immunity, the MAGA court also upended 40 years of precedent by overturning the Chevron doctrine. In doing so, they have potentially turned the federal government upside down in a very dangerous way, declaring that judges now know better than agency experts on matters ranging from student loans to Medicare to AI to climate change to net neutrality and so much more. From now on, anytime there's a shred of legislative ambiguity, anytime Congress didn't explicitly anticipate every conceivable scenario for how agencies should apply complex policy, judges are now free to impose their own views, even if they don't know a lick about the policy in question, even though they are not they are the unelected branch of government. It is impossible for the Congress to think of every possible scenario. So either you have subject matter experts in the administration making a judgment call, or unelected judges making a judgment call. That was the whole point of the Chevron doctrine, to give administrative subject matter experts some deference. The MAGA court's annihilation of the Chevron doctrine is their latest and most dangerous attempt to side with powerful special interests against the wishes of the middle class, to come up with new legal theory to suit their ideological needs, and overturn decades of well-accepted precedent. And these cases are just the start. In the last few months, the conservative majority on the Supreme Court also has upheld racial gerrymandering in South Carolina. Can you imagine? Allowed the criminalization of homelessness. Struck down a common-sense ban on bump stocks. Defanged the EPA's ability to regulate against air pollution, and so much more. It all points to a clear, growing, disturbing trend emerging out of the Supreme Court. It is plain as day, this MAGA majority is hell-bent on siphoning power away from the electorate and from the other branches in order to reshape America in their ultra-conservative and extreme vision. So I will repeat what I said at the top of my remarks. American democracy now stands at a crossroads. The MAGA court's disastrous rulings are the clearest illustration of why elections have consequences. And this year, the American people will choose between two vastly different visions for our country. If Donald Trump returns to the Oval Office, if Republicans retake control of Congress, the disastrous rulings coming out of the Supreme Court will just be the start. The chaos we saw on January 6th will just be the start. If they get the chance, Donald Trump and the MAGA right will plunge our country into an abyss of extremism the vast majority of Americans oppose and America has really never seen. Nowhere else is this contrast between Democrats and Republicans as clear as on the issue of reproductive freedom. This week, Senate Democrats intend to pick up where we left off in June by bringing every single member of this chamber to task on a woman's fundamental right to choose. It's our goal to take up a very simple resolution, co-sponsored by every female senator in our caucus and myself, that asks a very, very simple question. Where do senators stand on freedom of choice? Do we believe that a woman should have a basic right to reproductive care? Do we agree that the rights protected under Roe should be federal law? Freedom of choice is perhaps the defining issue for Americans this year. And this week, every senator must show where they stand. Of course, Democrats have already made it abundantly clear where we stand. Yes, we emphatically believe women should be free to make their own health care choices. Democrats also believe in building on the incredible progress of the last 3.5 years. Under Democratic leadership, we've made great strides in America to lower the cost of living. We've made prescription drugs like insulin more affordable. We have brought manufacturing jobs back to our shores. We have invested in a clean energy economy. And on the world stage, we have stood up to defend democracy against autocrats and restored America's good name among the free nations of the world. Donald Trump and the MAGA right cannot say any of this. Instead, what Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans have made clear is that if they get into power, they will dismantle American democracy as we know it. MAGA radicals are long done with talking in euphemisms. The leader of one of America's most powerful conservative think tanks recently made the hard right goals very clear. Quote, "We are in the process of the second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be." That, Madam President, is the kind of talk that leads to political violence. To go down the road that MAGA radicals want to take is to take America into the twilight zone, something more akin to the autocratic fervor we saw in Europe in the early 20th century than the America we all know and love. So, the stakes for our country this year are immense. Here in the Senate, Democrats will continue bringing to the floor the issues that matter to Americans most and work ferociously to defend them. And while it's tempting to reduce elections nowadays to a form of reality TV, the truth is that the stakes are much higher. It's the battle for two radically different visions of our country. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.
Now, for all the chaos and disaster of the first Trump presidency, it pales in comparison to the threat of a second Trump presidency. We've all heard about the policy platform 2025, drafted by the Heritage Foundation, a project overseen by former Trump officials and advisors and appointees. It's a manifesto for the second Trump presidency. What does it do? The Trump manifesto lays the groundwork for a nationwide abortion ban. That's the heart and soul of the Republican Party. That's where they always go when they're in power, folks. They give some, when they're not in power, they give some words here and there. When they're running for office, they try to run away from how they vote and how they feel. Then they come here and they vote to roll over women's rights again and again and again. And each time they do it, it becomes more extreme and more extreme. And that's just the beginning on the issues. The Trump Manifesto 2025 calls for the most conservative agenda America has ever seen. It calls for more tax cuts for the very wealthy, more tax cuts for corporate elites, more tax cuts for mega corporations. It calls for reversing Democrats' clean energy agenda while empowering the nation's biggest oil and gas polluters. And the Trump Manifesto even calls for silencing and attacking all of Donald Trump's political opponents. Can you imagine? It's like a dictatorship. It's like a dictatorship. With nothing said, Trump says, I'm going to prosecute people. No evidence. Wow. What happened to rule of law in this grand country? What happened to the visions of the founding fathers when Donald Trump and the MAGA court takes over? The hard right is done speaking in euphemisms. They're smelling blood. They're saying it straight to our faces. If you can disagree with Donald Trump, watch your back. It's bone-chilling. It's un-American. It's dangerous for our democracy. The Trump Manifesto is an autocrat's dream. If MAGA Republicans get the chance to act on the Heritage Foundation's ideas, the damage to the America we all know and love may well be irreversible. We'll never get it back. Our children and our grandchildren will live in a less grand country than we have lived in. The destruction would be unthinkable, and it would betray everything America has represented for 248 years. Now, on the Iowa abortion ban project and Project 2025. This morning, Over 1.5 million women across Iowa woke up with fewer rights than they had just last night. Today, a draconian new law went into effect in Iowa banning abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, before many women even know they are pregnant. Iowa's new abortion law is radical, it's dangerous, and sadly, it's another example of the hard right taking America back in time through the courts. By now, it's beyond debate that attacking reproductive freedoms is a fundamental tenet of the GOP. Not 3 days ago, Donald Trump gave a speech where he bragged yet again about overturning Roe. He said, quote, "We really did something nobody thought was possible. I want to thank the 6 Supreme Court justices for the wisdom and courage they showed," unquote. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? Donald Trump wants to thank the 6 Supreme Court justices for the courage of overturning Roe. What a callous message to send to women in states like Iowa, in states like Florida, in states like Arizona and Texas, and others, where freedom of choice is under assault. Of course, Donald Trump brags about overturning Roe all the time. A few months ago, Donald Trump said he was also, quote, proud, unquote, to be the one to have cleared the way for overturning Roe. And he said, quote, "Nobody else was going to get that done but me." America, when Republicans try to sound moderate on choice, they know where the public is, they know where women are. Remember the words of Donald Trump, who said he was proud to eliminate Roe. Remember the votes of the Republican senators knowingly voting for justice nominees who were way to the right and who in their hearings said that they would overturn Roe, or very much alluded to that fact. Now, of course, Donald Trump didn't reverse Roe alone. As I said, he had plenty of help from Senate Republicans who confirmed 3 MAGA extremists to the bench, all of whom ruled in favor of reversing Roe. And just a few weeks ago, when Republicans were given a chance to do the right thing on reproductive freedoms, they doubled down on their anti-woman views by blocking a bill expressing support for a woman's right to choose. Last month, Senate Republicans even opposed protections for IVF and contraceptives. Can you imagine? They voted against protections for IVF and contraception. The Republican credo might as well be your body, our choice. And let's not kid ourselves. This is just the beginning as far as Republicans are concerned. Republicans like the junior senator from Ohio are on the record saying, quote, I would certainly like abortion to be illegal nationally. That's the Republican nominee for vice president. I would certainly like abortion to be illegal nationally. Let me repeat it again. I would certainly like abortion to be illegal nationally. And this isn't a view that was dug up from way in the past. This was a statement in 2022. Again, let me say to Americans, when Republicans try to sound moderate on choice, remember the words of Donald Trump. Remember the words of the Republican senator, the junior Republican senator from Ohio, now the vice presidential nominee on the Republican Party, who said he supports a national ban on abortion. Consider also Trump's plan for a second term as detailed in Project 2025. The document makes clear that if Republicans reclaim power, they will lay the groundwork for a national abortion ban. Under Project 2025, Republicans could also allow employers to deny access to birth control, continue attacks against in vitro fertilization, and could even keep track of the state of residency of every woman who seeks an abortion anywhere. Can you imagine? This is heinous, it's unhinged, but it's precisely what MAGA extremism proposes for the country. Americans do not want to take our country backward, as Project 2025 promises to do. Americans want an agenda that promises a brighter future. They want leaders who will focus on creating more jobs and lowering costs and expanding people's freedoms, not the oppressive nastiness that Project 2025 promises. The more the American people learn the details about Project 2025, the more trouble Donald Trump is going to have. I yield the floor. President. Now, Madam President, 245 days ago, I stood right here in the Senate floor, on the Senate floor, to raise the alarm of rising anti-Semitism in America and the need to condemn anti-Semitism whenever we see it. This week, Squirrel Hill, the Tree of Life Synagogue massacre of 2018, was targeted once again with anti-Semitic vandalism and attacks. These attacks are vile, they're hurtful, they poison our society with division, fear, grief. And for the Squirrel Hill community, which has already suffered unimaginable tragedy, this is particularly horrific. It pains me to say that anti-Semitism like this is unfortunately not unusual today. In our community and in our politics, anti-Semitism is ascendant. This week, none other than Donald Trump once again added to the division. Yesterday, during a radio interview with WABC in New York City, Donald Trump agreed with his interviewer that the nation's second gentleman, a Jewish American, is quote unquote, a crappy Jew. Why? Presumably because he's a Democrat. On air, Donald Trump then repeated the sick idea that if you're a Jew and if you happen to support Democrats, you should have your head examined, and that you're a bunch of fools. Sadly, we've been here before, but it must be said again. Donald Trump's comments were reprehensible, dangerous, and proof that he is disturbingly at ease with anti-Semitic rhetoric. It might be tempting to listen what Donald Trump said on the radio and tune it out just as another Trump insult, but that would be a mistake. Calling Jews fools and suggesting they are bad or disloyal because of their political beliefs is not just some juvenile insult. It's an old anti-Semitic trope that goes back centuries, one of dual loyalty. It's been used for a very long time to drive Jews out of their homes, to paint them as untrustworthy, to deny their basic dignity. So when Donald Trump goes on air and attacks Jews for the way they vote, he knows precisely what he is doing. He is sowing the seeds of division. He is propagating naked anti-Semitism. Donald Trump will always try to drag this nation down with insults, intolerance, fear, smear. But we are better than that, as the American people will make very clear, in the months to come.
Everybody, wasn't that a great roll call? Now just let me hear you if you're ready for President Kamala Harris. Friends, we're here to talk about one thing, tomorrow, and building a better tomorrow for all Americans. This November, we can choose a brighter, a fairer, a freer future, or we can relive the dark night of Trump's American carnage. Only one candidate will move America forward, Kamala Harris. Vice President Harris has been the best partner Senate Democrats could ever have asked for. Under her and President Biden's leadership, Senate Democrats lowered prescription drug prices and created millions of good-paying American jobs. I worked with Kamala Harris when she was Senator Harris. I saw a leader who was fearless, who stood up for middle-class families like the one she was raised in, who focused on things that really mattered. Helping parents raise their kids, safe neighborhoods, safe schools, and building an opportunity economy that gives everyone a shot at the American dream. She will lead America forward into a brighter future, but she can't do it alone. She needs a Democratic majority in the Senate of the United States. Now, my friends, 2 years ago, the naysayers said Senate Democrats stood no chance in the midterms. I told them, just you wait. We're going to keep the Senate and maybe pick up a seat or two, and that's exactly what happened. Well, ladies and gentlemen, my good friends at this convention, I am telling all of you now, we're going to hold the Senate again, and we're poised to pick up seats. A Democratic majority to create good-paying jobs and lower costs, to defend a woman's right to choose, to deliver for communities back home. Our senators are doing it, like Jackie Rosen, delivering high-speed rail for Nevada, John Tester, bringing high-tech jobs to Montana, and Bobby Casey and Sherrod Brown and Tammy Baldwin and Martin Heinrich fixing bridges in Pennsylvania and Ohio and Wisconsin and New Mexico. We also have amazing candidates. Ruben Gallego, Angela Alsobrooks, Andy Kim, Alyssa Slotkin, Lisa Blunt, Rochester, Colin Allred, Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. And folks, listen to this. More than half of our candidates are candidates of color. We're making the Senate look like America. Now let's compare that with Senate Republicans. Senate Republicans pretend to care about middle-class families, but they voted no on expanding the child tax credit, and J.D. Vance didn't even show up to vote. Senate Republicans pretend to care about the border, but they voted no on the strongest border bill in a decade. Republicans tend to care about freedom, but they voted no on a woman's right to choose. No to safeguard IVF. No to birth control. That is just a taste of their extreme agenda. Is that what we want for America? Do we want a Republican Senate that assaults reproductive freedoms? Do we want a Republican Senate that cuts taxes for the rich, rigs the game for big oil and big pharma? Well, folks, the choice is ours. Now, let me close on a personal note. As the highest-ranking Jewish elected official in American history, I want my grandkids and all grandkids to never, never face discrimination because of who they are. But Donald Trump, this is a guy who peddles anti-Semitic stereotypes. He even invited a white supremacist to Mar-a-Lago. And unfortunately, his prejudice goes in all directions. He fuels Islamophobia and issued a Muslim ban as president. Tonight, folks, I am wearing this blue square to stand up to anti-Semitism, to stand up to all hate. Our children, our grandchildren, no matter their race, no matter their creed, their gender or family, deserve better than Donald Trump's American carnage. So, are you ready to make sure Donald Trump never, ever gets near the White House again? So let's elect Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, and a Democratic majority in the Senate, and keep the torch of freedom burning bright for generations to come. On to victory in November.
Now, as far as their timeline, let's be very clear about what Republicans are trying to do with this 6-month CR. They're trying to lay the groundwork for Project 2025 in hopes they get favorable result in the election. That's why the right wing is pushing this. It's not just, that they don't like government funding. They have this horrible document, Project 2025, which would turn America inside out. I believe it would create huge economic, social, all kinds of problems, problems of protecting freedom. But that's what they want to do. That's their goal. Why Speaker Johnson goes along with it is beyond me. But by trying to set up a funding fight in March, Republicans, right-wing Republicans, hope for the chance to hold government funding hostage in exchange for some of the nastiest, most harmful policies that Donald Trump promises in his Project 2025. Let there be no mistake. Project 2025 is the Trump agenda. Some of his top advisors helped put it together. Some of the lead people on this are talked about for high-up positions in a Trump administration, should God forbid it occur. Over 140 people who work in the Trump administration contributed to it, who have worked in the Trump administration contribute to it. To call the ideas in Trump's Project 2025 radical would be an understatement. Project 2025 would pave the way for the hard right's national abortion ban by restricting access to FDA-approved medication. Project 2025 would abolish the Department of Education, decimate our public education system by wiping out school meal programs. Hungry kids? You want to send people to school with an empty belly? They can't learn. Oh, we have to spend a little money to provide a nutritious breakfast, which incidentally helps our farmers? Isn't that horrible, says the right wing. They'd rather their billionaires who help fund all of this stuff pay even less money to the government. It would defund public schools. They'd end student loan forgiveness. All the young people who have this burden of student loans on their back, you and I and others, Mr. President, are trying to reduce or eliminate that burden. Forget it if this right-wing budget goes into effect. Project 2025 would make health care less affordable for tens of millions of Americans. It would rip away benefits from our veterans. It would attack small farmers and small businesses and so much more. The list goes on and on and on, unfortunately. These ideas aren't theoretical. No. They're not abstract ideas up in the clouds. They're real proposals that the hard right intends to push if they come into power. They are so narrow and so focused on their own agenda. As I said, in large part over the years, funded by billionaires, greedy. Not all wealthy people are greedy. Many of them understand their obligation to help the country that's been so good to them. But they're a narrow group, very greedy. They don't want to pay any taxes, some of them. Let's have a national sales tax, some of them say, which would, that would create huge inflation on the average middle class, so they don't have to pay an income tax. Lord help us. And Republicans right now are hoping that a funding fight early next year would turn into a hostage negotiation between keeping the government open and passing Project 2025's terrible policies. But let me assure the American people, we Democrats are not fooled, and let me assure our mainstream Republicans who quietly grit their teeth when they hear about this, that the American people are not fooled. A surprisingly large number of American people have already heard of Project 2025 and don't like it. The more people learn about Project 2025, the more they realize how devastating it is and how horrible it would be for our economy, how disastrous it would be for public safety, and how catastrophic it would be for our country. Yes. Let's first do questions on this subject, and then I'll get to you, okay?
Donald Trump continues to try to distance himself from Project 2025. One way is by proposing that he wants to make IVF free for families. Doesn't it plan on putting that theory to test by bringing legislation back to the floor?
Stay tuned. Yes.
So going off of that, the former president has indicated that he would likely not sign a national abortion ban. What do you make of this and contrasting that with all?
Look at everything he said over the years. Look at everything he said over the years, proudly bragging that he put the people on the Supreme Court who repealed Roe v. Wade. No one believes him. Everyone knows what he's going to do. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Schumer. You all spent the last 5 to 6 weeks back home in your districts. Is this message penetrating with your constituents?
Yes.
Do you feel like it's resonating?
It is utterly amazed. I was pleasantly amazed when we saw the polling data that over 65% of Americans had heard of Project 2025, and 3/4 of those knows it's very bad. It's amazing. It's really hit home. And that's why it came up in the debate, and that's why Trump was so defensive about it in the debate. Yes.
Trump called parts of this plan abysmal and he disavowed it. Why not focus on his Agenda 47, which is what he put on his website as his actual plan, instead of...
Because this is this is what Trump will do. These are his supporters. They spent months together figuring out what to do. We know that Donald Trump will just say something on a dime because he's under pressure. Everyone knows this is his plan, not what he's trying to run on right now because he knows what he wants to do is so unpopular. Yes, in the back.
Is this resonating in the Montana Senate race at all? And is there a need for a change of strategy there, given the polling that
Look, John Tester is going to win that race. Everyone knows he represents Montana very well. This is resonating in every part of the country. Last one.
The document says hits DEI pretty hard, and in the Treasury Department specifically, it says that their plan is to haul in every Treasury official that has. And I was wondering if there is a need for, if they're looking at federal protection.
Well, we're going to have 5 more of the 10 worst next week. Okay. Now you get the last question on a off topic.
Yesterday, a group of Republicans stood where you all are standing and said basically if Democrats don't pass the SAVE Act, they will be held to pay, especially when it comes to January 6th. Again, we know what happened a few years ago. So my question to you is, will you put it on the floor even as a standalone? And if not, what are your concerns with it?
Let me just say, we're not going to get into detailed negotiations. As we've said before, we need a bipartisan bill where everyone comes together and figures out what to do. As you've seen, the chaos in the House, because Speaker Johnson is trying to do this in a partisan way, guided by the far right, he's not getting anywhere. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Oh, I love this chart.
Thank you.
Great. All right.
Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming, and I'm proud to be joined by my colleagues. And I'm also want to give special compliments to our chart maker. Now, look at the little touches on this chart. First, have you ever seen such beautiful exclamation points? And second, exposing ripped.
Who did the chart? Oh, nice.
So, special compliments to our chart makers, wherever they are. Okay. Anyway. It's true. I'm not joking. I'm very serious about how great the chart is. Okay, thanks. I am very serious. Yes. I want to thank my colleagues are no joking matter either, and they are great colleagues. It's Senators Murray and Smith and Stabenow and Kelly and Warnock. Now, why are we here? We're here today to talk about the very real dangers of Project 2025, the agenda Donald Trump's second administration would adopt, should, God forbid, he return to office. For all the chaos and disaster of the first Trump presidency, it pales in comparison to the harmful ways a second Trump presidency would impact our country. Project 2025 is the Trump agenda. Make no mistake about it. People within his inner circle wrote it. Over 200 former officials of the Trump presidency were part of the project, and they wrote it as the blueprint for him. Many of these individuals could very well rejoin a second Trump administration and be in charge of implementing policy. Project 2025 would be their how-to manual. And what are the Republicans hiding in Project 2025? An American nightmare. the most conservative, unhinged, and extreme agenda we've seen in modern times. Trump's first term in office wouldn't hold a candle to the ideas of Project 2025. Today, my colleagues and I want to talk in depth about some of the absolute worst of the Project 2025 policies. So let me hit on some of the most destructive things. And it's on this chart. First, on education. Yeah, it would abolish the Department of Education and eliminate Head Start. 2.9 million children have Head Start. And Republicans claim they care about families, but eliminating Head Start means Republicans want to kill a program that everything shows makes it far more likely that low-income kids graduate high school, attend college, earn more money, lead healthier lives. They want to kill it, eliminate it. That's right in their proposal. And these are, there's so many bad proposals. We've just picked out a few. Healthcare Project 2025 would send the cost of healthcare and prescription drugs soaring. They repealed the $35 insulin cap. $35 insulin cap is one of the most important and popular things we've done. We hear about it everywhere we go. You can be in a blue state, a red state, a purple state. Everyone is so happy that insulin's afforded, they want to eliminate it. Women's health care. Project 2025 would intensify the GOP war on reproductive freedom by laying the groundwork for a national abortion ban. And it also pushes states to monitor women's pregnancies. Women of America hear that. They're thinking of monitoring women's pregnancies. They want the states to do that. Housing affordability. Finally, Project 2025 would make it harder for Americans to own a home. They would privatize Fannie and Freddie. That's going to make mortgage rates go up. It causes dramatic spikes in mortgage rates, makes it much harder to buy a home. So, folks, this is sinister stuff. The vast majority of Americans oppose them, yet it's precisely what the hard right is promising the American people if Donald Trump returns to office. Now, each of my colleagues will elaborate on some of these, and I want to first call on Senator.
Hold authorizations, licenses, and other grants of authority issued by the Commission and that have certain foreign ownership and for other purposes.
In order to place the bill on the calendar under the provisions of Rule 14, I'd object to further proceeding.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Thank you, Madam President. Now, Madam President, yesterday afternoon I spoke with Secret Service Acting Director Roe after an armed suspect was arrested after fleeing from former President Trump's golf course in West Palm Beach, Florida. I will say what I have said many times before. There is no place in America for political violence of any kind. I'm glad the former president is safe, and I applaud the Secret Service and all first responders for acting quickly before anyone got hurt. As for the perpetrator, he should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We all must do our part to ensure an incident like this does not happen again. This means that Congress has a responsibility to ensure the Secret Service and all law enforcement have the resources they need to do their jobs. So as we continue the appropriations process, if the Secret Service is in need of more resources, we are prepared to providing it for them, possibly in the upcoming funding agreement. Now on IVF. 2 years ago, Donald Trump and the MAGA Supreme Court succeeded in overturning Roe and ripping away the right to choose from millions of Americans. This year, as we have seen in states like Alabama, the hard right has its sights on a new target, IVF. So tomorrow, the Senate will take up Senator Duckworth, your bill, Madam President, Senator Duckworth's bill, the Right to IVF Act, to establish a nationwide right to IVF and make it easier for people to access this vital treatment. This is the very same legislation that almost every single Senate Republican voted against earlier this summer. This past weekend in New York, I stood with some amazing families and some amazing parents and their beautiful baby, a miracle of IVF, to say that we Democrats will do everything we can to protect access to IVF. And I hope that in this chamber we'll be joined by our Republican colleagues when we vote tomorrow, because tomorrow we will take up Senator Duckworth's Right to IVF Act. The vast majority of Americans support requiring insurance plans to cover IVF treatments. And I bet every one of us knows someone who has struggled with infertility at one point or another. In my own family, IVF was the answer to our prayers. I have a beautiful grandchild, thanks to the miracle of IVF. And I could not bear to imagine the pain we'd feel if we'd been told, sorry, you're out of luck. If Republicans truly stand on the side of families, as they regularly claim, then they should leap at the opportunity to protect people's right to access IVF. They should stand ready to pass a bill that makes this treatment available on insurance plans. They should vote yes tomorrow. Of course, we're already beginning to hear the same tired and predictable and unconvincing excuses from our Republican colleagues looking for a way to vote against IVF protections. To my Republican colleagues, if you truly support IVF, then vote for a bill that actually protects IVF through the letter of the law. Republicans cannot claim to be pro-family on the one hand, while then voting against IVF protection bills on the other. Americans are much smarter than that. Republicans had a chance to back up their rhetoric with action when we voted earlier this year, and nearly all of them failed. I hope tomorrow will bring a different result. The American people will be watching. Now on the CR, legislators now have roughly 2 weeks to reach an agreement to keep the government open beyond the September 30th deadline. It's not really much time at all. In order to avoid a shutdown, the worst thing our colleagues in the House can do right now is waste time on proposals that don't have broad bipartisan support. But that's what the Speaker and his Republican colleagues have been doing all month long, and it's already September. And for your amazing work on this issue. Yes, yes, woman in the black dress.
If the House CR fails tomorrow with the SAVE Act attack, what is your timeline for moving on the Senate version of the CR? And
Look, the way to get this done is bipartisan, bicameral. We've told that to Speaker Johnson, as we told it to Speaker McCarthy before, and we hope after this vote he will sit down and negotiate a bipartisan, bicameral bill. Yes, Manu.
Former President Trump's allies have blamed Democratic rhetoric for leading to these repeated assassination attempts and calling him a threat to democracy. So given that, will you stop calling him a threat to democracy?
The bottom line is that our Democratic Senate has drawn very clearly the differences between the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and what we believe in. We're going to continue to do that. Yes?
Senator Schumer, do you believe the Secret Service should get more funding in this round of budget negotiations, and will it be enough to solve the problems that they currently have in the middle of this very important?
Look, if the Secret Service believes they need more money, I would be very open to giving them that more money in this bill or the next bill, however quickly we can work it out and get bipartisan agreement. No other women. Okay.
Are you satisfied with the level of coverage the Secret Service is giving?
Well, we're getting, we'll be briefed by the Secret Service in detail very shortly. Yes?
And so just to follow up a little bit, and this might be a question for Chair Murray, has the Secret Service asked for more money for short-term coverage, like it's the election season, so that they can have more resources to be able to cover these campaign events?
So we've been in close touch with the Secret Service about what their needs are. We do have an anomaly from OMB regarding fast-forwarding some of their funding for the CR, which is the critical issue that we need to do. Hopefully, as soon as Speaker Johnson decides he's ready to go.
Okay.
Senator Schumer.
Yes, Sahil.
Donald Trump just posted a few moments ago that if he's elected president, he would get salt back to the reduction. I know that's a priority of yours. What's your response?
I've always been for eliminating the cap on salt. I think it was a nasty piece of legislation supported by Donald Trump, aimed at the blue states, which help the people of their states in many ways. Thank you, everybody. Now on the salt cap. In the 8 long years that Donald Trump has been in politics, one thing is beyond doubt. What Donald Trump says and what Donald Trump does are two very different things. Donald Trump says he fights for working people, and then ushers in perhaps the most anti-worker administration in modern times as president. Donald Trump claims he's a leader on fertilization, IVF, unquote, whatever that means. But his MAGA justices overturned Roe and cast women's reproductive care into chaos. Yesterday, Donald Trump did it again, totally reversing himself, claiming that he will reverse the cap on state and local deductions. But Donald Trump must be suffering from selective amnesia, because he was the one who took away people's SALT deductions in the first place. His tax bill did it, a dagger aimed at blue states that want to spend a little more to help people with housing and health care and education, transportation. All of a sudden, now that he is on Long Island, Donald Trump's selective amnesia kicks in, and he totally reverses himself on SALT. But we know Donald Trump. We know what his MO is. He's going to do nothing. He's simply trying to escape the anger of many families. He's upset when he placed those caps, which affect so many middle-class people, particularly in higher-cost areas like Long Island. So he shows up in Long Island, says he's changed his mind, and we know he'll do nothing about it. And then, when some of his more right-wing people go to him and say you can't do it, he'll say, okay. So this is not only an empty promise, but it shows the hypocrisy of Donald Trump. For Donald Trump to pretend he's found religion on eliminating the SALT caps 2 months before an election, speaking in Long Island, is comical, it's unserious, and it shows the lack of integrity that this man has. His promises carry about as much weight as monopoly money. Remember, the SALT cap was one of the key parts of Donald Trump's own tax law. Congressional Republicans pushed the cap. He signed it. Donald Trump's own Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, called SALT a subsidy for states like New York, even though for decades New York paid tens of billions more in taxes than we received from the federal government. And to this day, SALT caps remain in place because extreme Republicans have blocked any attempt to fix this defective policy. I've been a loud proponent of eliminating the SALT cap from the start. As long as I am leader, I'll do everything in my power so that when these caps expire at the end of next year, they will not come back. Double taxing hardworking owners on Long Island, in the Hudson Valley, and across New York, and many other states as well, largely blue states, is plainly unfair and could not have come up at a worse time than the last few years, with so much chaos caused by COVID and the economic turmoil it unleashed. So for families frustrated by the SALT cap, so many on Long Island, firefighters, police officers, construction workers who make good salaries, they've got Donald Trump and congressional Republicans to thank for their pain. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And I am proud to be joined by Senators Stabenow, Klobuchar, Blumenthal, Schatz, and Warnock. And again, as I said last week when we did this, a special thanks to our wonderful chart makers. Now, I want you to know, first, look at these terrific exclamation points. You put those in your story. And then, coup de grace, the ripped out Project 2025. See the rip? Because we're exposing it. Thank you, everybody. It's been nice meeting with you all. Okay. All right. I do want to thank Senators Stabenow, Klobuchar, Blumenthal, Schatz, and Warnock for being here, and each of them talking about a portion of 2025. There is so much in it. We could be here every day for a long time. But Senator Stabenow will talk about the middle-class taxes, Klobuchar on democracy, Blumenthal on border security, Schatz on national security, and Warnock on workers' rights. Now, last week, Senate Democrats came together to shine a light on just some of the dangers of Project 2025. So last week, we sounded an alarm on all of the ways Project 2025 would decimate American education, women's reproductive freedoms, our veterans, housing, and more. But of course, that's just a fraction of the horrors that Project 2025 holds. That's why today we will highlight a few others that hold grave consequences for American families, our national security, and our very democracy. So we're here to shine a light on Project 2025 once again, this time by looking at ways it would raise taxes, hurt American workers, compromise border security, threaten our democracy, and make America less safe. And as we go over each issue, I want to remind everybody, this is the Trump plan. Project 2025 has been led by former Trump officials who put together a blueprint of what they want to get done should Trump, God forbid, get in office. So this is the Trump plan led by so many of his former employees, and they said it. The Heritage Foundation, who he relies on, said this is what we're going to do. So make no mistake about it. They're trying to run away from it now because it's so devastating for just about every American, but that's the plan. Make no mistake about it. Excuse me if we take Donald Trump's attempts to distance himself from Project 2025 with the world's largest grain of salt. Donald Trump, a few years ago, said that the Heritage Foundation would, quote, these are his words, lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement would do. Again, Donald Trump, the Heritage Foundation, which sponsored Project 2025, would lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement would do. The head of the Heritage Foundation said earlier this year that his goal was, quote, institutionalizing Trumpism, unquote, including with Project 2025. Let me say those words again as well. Institutionalizing Trumpism. That's what this does. And what does that mean? First, 2025 is going to punish middle-class families with hurtful tax hikes while raising tax cuts for the wealthy. The plan is estimated to raise taxes on middle-class families by $3,000. It'll give a $1.5 million tax break to the ultra-wealthy who earn more than $10 million. Can you believe that? One tax cut for the ultra-rich wasn't enough for Donald Trump and his MAGA right. They want to do it again. At the end of the day, that's always their end game. Tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy, paid for by everybody else. Second, 2025 will punish working families Trump pretends to care about. American workers will work longer hours for less pay, as overtime pay is undermined. Many people have to work 40 hours and not get overtime pay. The Biden administration moved to correct that, and now they want to undo it. Dagger at the heart of the middle class. An estimated 4.3 million shift workers could have their overtime and wage protections eroded as guaranteed weekly time and a half pay is ended. And at the time of immense global instability, with Russia invading Ukraine, Iran funding terror groups, the CCP increasing its aggression in the Indo-Pacific, Project 2025 makes America less safe, much less safe. 2025 breaks down the State Department, has us withdraw from the World Bank, increases the risk of catastrophic nuclear war, and wastes vital national security resources to finish Donald Trump's ineffective border wall. And for all the hard right's lip service to border security, Project 2025 rejects the bipartisan border security plan we released earlier this year, the strongest bipartisan border security bill in decades. Instead of effective bipartisan policy, 2025 would drive a policy of utter cruelty for mass deportations with little to no due process. It even risks deporting 3 million dreamers. Can you believe it? That's the risk of this plan. Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, and Project 2025 have spread a message of hatred against immigrants looking for a better life in America. They have spread lies about Haitian immigrants. They have demonized refugees, and Project 2025 would lay the foundation for a mass deportation apparatus that would inflict untold pain on millions of families without making our country any safer. And finally, 2025 would weaken our democracy by opening the floodgates to foreign interference and big money in our democracy. 2025 will shut down proven efforts to block foreign interference in our elections, gutting the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency while eviscerating our campaign finance laws. When it comes to the evil and sinister Project 2025, I have three Brooklyn words: NFW. You fill in the blanks. Senate Democrats will fight these policies with all we've got. Our future is too important not to. Over the weekend, former President Donald Trump said at an event that, quote, if he becomes president, women, quote, will no longer be thinking about abortion, unquote. He uttered these words in the middle of another one of his incomprehensible rants, where he lamented about the state of women's health care, lamented that, quote, women have been through a lot, and where he claimed that things will somehow get better if he returned to office. At the risk of stating the obvious, Donald Trump has zero credibility when it comes to women's health care. And it's both ridiculous and insulting for Donald Trump to suggest women won't have to worry about abortion if he returns to the White House. Of course they will. Not 1 week ago, a report was published detailing the tragic story of a woman from Georgia who died because her state's abortion bans prevented her from receiving life-saving care. The story is equally parts heartbreaking and enraging when you read how this woman was denied proper care because she happened to live in, quote, the wrong state. Worst of all, there are undoubtedly more stories like hers out there. And make no mistake, these abortion bans are now a reality largely because of one person, Donald Trump. More than any single individual, Donald Trump is the reason women worry so much about abortion and reproductive health today. After all, it was Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans who appointed 3 ultra-conservative justices to the Supreme Court with the explicit goal of overturning Roe. It was Donald Trump who, again and again, bragged about ending protections under Roe. Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are also the ones who cleared the path for draconian bans at the state level. And as much as they now try to deny it, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans are the ones clamoring for the chance to pass a national abortion ban. Don't take it from me. Senator Vance, who Donald Trump chose as his running mate, said 2 years ago, quote, he would certainly like abortion to be illegal nationally. Certainly would like abortion to be illegal nationally. These were the words of Donald Trump's running mate. Statements like these give women plenty of reason to worry about Donald Trump returning to the White House. Look, when people have their rights taken away, they don't simply stop thinking about the issue. Former President Trump, that is not how it works. You can't fool people like you're trying to do. When people's rights are taken away, they start worrying about which rights will crumble next. They wonder, now that Republicans overturned Roe, what is next? Will women's pregnancies be monitored? Will drugs like mifepristone get banned? Will states start banning IVF? Now, none of this is theoretical. Many of these ideas are laid out in Donald Trump's Project 2025, and in a shocker to nobody, an overwhelming majority of Americans think the ideas of Project 2025 are toxic. Just yesterday, an NBC poll that only 4% of Americans viewed Project 2025 favorably, and more than half of Americans said they had strongly unfavorable views. The bottom line is this: Donald Trump and the hard right are the reason productive care is at its weakest point in modern history. But as Project 2025 makes clear, the MAGA right is just getting started, even though most Americans overwhelmingly reject their radical agenda. I'll yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum. Avoiding a shutdown. House Republican leadership needs to get the CR done quickly because we still need time in the Senate to move the bill through the floor. House Republicans should work with Democrats, House and Senate Democrats, to find the best path to getting the bill passed in a bipartisan way. The House Republicans have already wasted enough time as it is. Once the House acts, the Senate will move quickly to get the CR done. I encourage my colleagues on both sides to prioritize speedy passage of the CR. If both sides keep working together, if we stay away from poison pills and partisan spectacle, then the American people can rest assured there won't be a government shutdown. But we still have more work to do. Of course, nothing was inevitable about the tight deadline we face now. The bipartisan CR I negotiated with Speaker Johnson and leaders McConnell and Jeffries is more or less the result people expected from the beginning, a short-term CR, one that does not last 6 months, that is free of poison pills, and which honors the bipartisan funding levels we agreed to earlier this year. But this feels like the third or fourth time this Congress, House Republicans have had to learn the same elementary lesson. In a narrowly divided government, partisan bully tactics and appealing to the extreme just does not work, plain and simple. I know a few on the hard right say, oh, we can demand, bang our fists on the table, and force everyone to do what we want. That ain't happening. What they want to do is so destructive to America that the overwhelming number of Democrats and a large number of Republicans don't want to do it. But nonetheless, this feels like the third or fourth time in this Congress that the House Republicans have had to learn the same elementary lesson, and I say particularly the House hard-right Republicans in the Freedom Caucus. In a narrowly divided government, partisan bully tactics and appealing to the extremes simply does not work. I would have thought that would have been made clear a year ago, Mr. President, when Speaker McCarthy kept trying and trying and trying to appease the hard right with increasingly severe funding cuts. And it ended up being all for naught anyway. We ended up passing a bipartisan CR, and radicals turned on Speaker McCarthy. This time around, it was Donald Trump again telling the hard right to shut the government down if we didn't agree to their poison pill provisions. Never mind that a shutdown would mean costs would go up, programs like Head Start would halt, public safety here and at the border would suffer. To Donald Trump, these are all okay because they're just apparently the costs of feeding his ego. It is bewilderingly cynical to see Donald Trump push for a shutdown, knowing the pain it would cause the country. But thankfully, we are still on track to avoid that kind of mess. Of course, we still have more work to do. I earnestly hope today brings good news in the House. We here in the Senate are ready to work to get this bill done quickly. Madam President.
The Majority Leader.
Madam President, when the 119th Congress commences next year, one of the first great tasks of this body will be fulfilling our constitutional duty to provide advice and consent regarding the President-elect's nominees. The Advise and Consent Authority is a cornerstone of the Senate's constitutional mandate, a power central to preserving America's system of checks and balances. The Founding Fathers knew firsthand the great danger of allowing unchecked executives to appoint individuals to positions of power without any guardrails. In fact, this was one of their greatest grievances against the British Crown. Very soon, the Senate will be called upon to exercise its Advise and Consent authority once again as a new administration enters office next year. The Senate's Advise and Consent power will be especially important next year, given that the President-elect has at times made statements about potentially working around the Senate to appoint his nominees. Hopefully, this doesn't become an issue. But nevertheless, it will be the responsibility of the incoming Republican majority to protect the Senate against any attempt to erode its authority. So today I sent a letter to incoming Republican leader Thune, urging him to uphold the Senate's constitutional duty to provide advise and consent on the President's nominations. I said Democrats will be ready to work with Republicans in a bipartisan way on the nominations process and give each nominee the same fair and thorough consideration that previous nominees of both parties have received. We should hold hearings with the nominees and markups in committee, and senators should be given the chance to vote on nominees here on the Senate floor. The American people deserve public servants who put the needs of the country ahead of the political needs of any individual, Republican or Democrat. The American people deserve public servants whose judgment, character, and experience inspires confidence, and reflects our nation's highest ideals. Most of all, the American people deserve public servants who will uphold their oaths to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. The best mechanism for ensuring the President appoints qualified, capable, and ethical officials is precisely the advise and consent power of the Senate. And it will be the responsibility of the incoming majority and the incoming majority leader to ensure that the authority of the Senate is carried out and preserved. I urge incoming Leader Thune and Senate Republicans to work with Democrats to protect the Senate's authorities under the Constitution. Now on Senate business. We're at the beginning of what will be a very busy December. There's a lot the Senate has to do, both on the nominations and the legislative side, and not a lot of time to do them. Let me begin with the nominations. We're picking up where we left off before Thanksgiving, confirming more of the President's nominees to the bench and to federal agencies of great importance to the American people. Later this afternoon, the Senate will vote to confirm the nomination of Ann Wang to be District Judge for the Central District of California. As the week progresses, members should be advised we will aim to hold additional confirmation votes on the nominees that we invoke cloture on before the Thanksgiving break. We hope to move to them as soon as possible. On the legislative side, the Senate also has a handful of priorities we must deal with before the year is out. The annual Defense Authorization Bill, the NDAA, and the legislation to prevent a shutdown right before Christmas. On government funding, both sides are making progress negotiating on a bill that can pass the House and Senate with bipartisan support. We need to keep divisive and unnecessary provisions out of any government funding extension, or else it will get harder to pass a CR in time. For now, I'm pleased negotiations are on the right track, and I thank the appropriators in both chambers for their good work. Now, on the NDAA, I'm hopeful that we're close to beginning the process of moving a bipartisan bill through both chambers. The NDAA has been passed without fail for decades with the cooperation from both sides, and I hope this year is no exception. Few priorities matter more than providing for our national defense and taking care of our troops in uniform and their families. Finally, Senate Democrats will keep pushing to finish work on a disaster aid package to replenish the many relief programs that are dangerously low on resources. The President sent us his request last month and spelled out in very clear detail of the disastrous consequences should Congress fail to act. I remain hopeful we can get a disaster package done soon. National disasters affect red states and blue states and purple states and everything in between. We have a long tradition in this chamber of coming together when it comes to disaster aid, with very few exceptions. We should come together again at the end of the year to get disaster aid done, or we may not be ready to respond the next time Mother Nature wreaks havoc in our communities. And finally, on snowfall in western New York and upstate. First, let me say my team is monitoring the heavy lake effect snowfall that has pummeled western New York, just as New Yorkers were driving home from Thanksgiving. There are numerous reports of people left stranded in their cars, facing terrifying conditions and utter chaos on the road. In at least one instance, first responders saved the lives of one couple trapped on the road in the middle of the snowstorm. The governor has issued a state of emergency for a number of local counties, and I urge everyone impacted by the snowfall to follow local guidelines and stay off the road as much as they can. There's more heavy snowfall on the way. But amidst all the snow, Madam President, there was one happy element. Last night, all of America got to witness the beauty of Buffalo on national television, seeing the Buffalo Bills clinch the AFC East Championship amidst a deluge of snow. What happened in Orchard Park was out of a storybook, a snow globe game for the ages. Despite frigid temperatures, mounds of snow, and a tough opponent, the Buffalo Bills came out with a huge 35-10 victory over the 49ers. It was an amazing game to watch. I watched the whole thing. Josh Allen did it all. He set the franchise record for the most total touchdowns and became the first quarterback ever First quarterback ever to throw a touchdown, run for a touchdown, and catch a touchdown in the same game. An unthinkable hat trick. How impressive is that? And of course, as always, the Bills Mafia was out in full force, supporting the team, shoveling snow to get to their seats, and cheering even the harshest conditions, in the harshest conditions. They continue to show why the Bills Mafia is the most passionate and most loyal fan base in the league. Now, with their 5th straight division title, it's clear the Buffalo Bills are truly the beast of the East. So I only have 2 words to say. Go Bills. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.